Welcome to our deep dive into Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys. We've got this fantastic book review here, ready to unlock those layers even a seasoned Gaiman fan might miss.
And that's the exciting part, isn't it? Even in a well-known work, there are always fresh perspectives to uncover.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for you, imagine this fat Charlie. Your average Londoner discovers dear old dad wasn't just absent, he was Anansi the trickster god himself. And to top it off, he's got a brother named Spider, oozing with charm and magic. What's your first reaction?
Besides checking my own family tree for unexpected deities, it's that classic ordinary guy, extraordinary circumstances setup that Gaiman does so well. But what sets this apart is how Fat Charlie's yearning for a father figure clashes with Spider's manipulative nature. It shows how familial love, especially in the face of the absent parent, can be a source of both incredible strength and devastating weakness.
That's a really interesting point, especially when you consider how Spider represents that hidden confidence, even recklessness that Fat Charlie suppresses. It's almost like looking in a warped mirror, seeing your potential, but twisted in a way that's both alluring and dangerous.
Precisely. Imagine discovering a brother who embodies everything you repress. Spider forces Fat Charlie to confront those hidden desires, pushing him toward growth, even if it's through some uncomfortable, often hilarious situations.
Speaking of hilarious, the review highlighted how Razy Fat Charlie's fiance and Daisy the police officer grounded the story. It's almost like having these ordinary people react to the craziness makes the magic feel even more real.
Exactly. It's that contrast that Gaiman uses so effectively.
Mhm.
We relate to Rosie's confusion, Daisy's skepticism, and it makes a question: would we accept the magic or dismiss it like a bad dream?
Right. It makes the reader a participant in the disbelief, which makes the moments of wonder hit even harder. But beyond the fantastical elements, there's this theme of stories themselves being powerful. Anansi as the trickster god embodies this, but it goes deeper, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Anansi doesn't just tell stories, he weaves reality with them. It makes you wonder, is Gaiman suggesting that authors hold a similar power shaping our perceptions through the narratives they create? Does that make you as the reader complicit in the magic?
Whoa. That's a thought-provoking question for sure. It adds a whole new layer to the reading experience.
And that's Gaiman's brilliance. He blends folklore humor and modern life in a way that's both entertaining and intellectually stimulating. You laugh, you gasp, and then you find yourself pondering deep philosophical questions without realizing how you got there.
It's like he sneaks in the big ideas under the guise of a fantastical adventure.
And it works. He's masterful at taking these seemingly absurd situations and making them feel surprisingly plausible. It's like he's saying, look closer, magic might be hiding in plain sight.
I love that. It
Yeah,
makes you want to re-examine your own life and wonder, where's the magic hiding in my everyday routine?
exactly. And perhaps that's one of the core messages Gaiman is trying to convey: the power of stories to awaken our senses and make us see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
I think you've hit on something really important there. It's not just about escaping into a fantasy world. It's about bringing that sense of wonder back to our own lives.
Precisely. And Anansi Boys, with its blend of humor, heart, and captivating storytelling, is the perfect vehicle for that message.
Speaking of captivating storytelling, the review also praised Gaiman's ability to create vivid imagery with his writing. It's not just what happens in the story, it's how he describes it that pulls you in.
He paints with words, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You can practically feel the humid Florida air, smell the spices in Fat Charlie's kitchen, hear the rustle of Anansi's spider silk clothes. It's a sensory experience as much as a narrative one.
And those descriptions really underscore how he seamlessly blends those mundane details with the fantastical elements. It's not just gods and magic happening on some separate plane of existence. It's happening in the midst of ordinary life.
Exactly, and that makes it all the more believable somehow. It's like those moments where you catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of your eye, something you can't quite explain.
Yeah.
Gaiman captures that feeling perfectly.
And by grounding the story in these specific cultural influences, like the Caribbean setting and the Anansi tales themselves, he adds a whole other layer of richness to the narrative. It's not just a generic fantasy world, it feels lived in and authentic.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes Anansi Boys so much more than just a fun read.
Yeah.
It's a story that resonates on multiple levels, inviting us to explore not just the world of the story, but our own perceptions of reality as well.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about Fat Charlie's unexpected family reunion, the power of stories, and how Gaiman masterfully blends the mundane with the magical myth. But there's still so much more to unpack.
Indeed. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating story. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into some of the key takeaways and explore what makes this story so compelling for readers of all backgrounds.
Sounds good to me. See you in part 2. Welcome back to our deep dive into Anansi Boys. Last time we were talking about how Gaiman seamlessly blends the ordinary with the extraordinary, like finding magic hiding in plain sight.
And that's what makes the story so relatable, isn't it? We all have those moments where we glimpse something we can't quite explain, and Gaiman gives us permission to embrace that sense of wonder.
Absolutely. But beyond the magical elements, there's this fascinating exploration of family, both the family we're born into and the family we choose. What stood out to you about those dynamics in Anansi Boys?
Well, it's complex, isn't it? You have Fat Charlie longing for connection with his absent father, and then suddenly he has this brother Spider, who embodies everything their father was. But it's not a simple case of missing dad found brother happy ending.
Right. It's almost like Spider is a cautionary tale showing Fat Charlie what he could become if he fully embraced his trickster heritage.
Think about it. Spider is charismatic, manipulative, and thrives on chaos, much like their father Anansi. He represents those darker impulses that Fat Charlie tries so hard to repress.
So in a way, Spider forces Fat Charlie to confront a question we all face. How much of who we are is determined by our genes and how much is shaped by our choices?
Exactly. It's nature versus nurture, played out against a backdrop of gods and magic. And it's not just about blood ties either. The book also explores those chosen families we create through friendships and shared experiences.
Absolutely. We see this in Fat Charlie's relationship with Rosie, his fiancée, who represents stability and normalcy in his increasingly chaotic life. And then there's Daisy, the police officer, who initially seems like an outsider, but ultimately plays a crucial role in helping Fat Charlie find his own strength.
These characters remind us that family is not always about who we're related to, but who we choose to let into our lives, who supports us and helps us become the best versions of ourselves.
And sometimes those chosen families can be even more powerful and supportive than our biological ones. It's like Gaiman is saying, look beyond bloodlines. True connection comes from shared values and experiences.
Exactly. And those connections, those chosen bonds, are what ultimately give Fat Charlie the strength to face his fears and embrace his true potential.
That brings us to another key takeaway, the power of storytelling itself. We talked about how Anansi literally shapes reality with his tales. But how does that translate to the reader's experience?
It's like Gaiman is inviting us to be active participants in the storytelling process. He gives us these fantastical elements, these hints of magic, and then asks us to fill in the gaps with our own imagination.
So it's not just passively consuming a story, it's about co-creating the experience with the author.
Precisely. And in doing so, we begin to question our own perceptions of what's real and what's possible. We start to see the magic in our own lives, the unexpected connections, the moments of synchronicity that we might have otherwise dismissed,
It's like he's giving us permission to embrace the wonder and mystery that exists all around us.
and to find our own voices, to tell our own stories, and perhaps even shape our own realities in the process.
I love that. It's not just about escaping into a fantasy world, it's about bringing that sense of wonder back to our everyday lives.
Exactly. And Anansi Boys, with its blend of humor, heart, and captivating storytelling, does that brilliantly. It reminds us that even in the midst of the ordinary, there's always room for the extraordinary.
Speaking of extraordinary, the review highlighted how Gaiman uses Fat Charlie and Spider's contrasting personalities to explore different aspects of their shared heritage. What did you make of that dynamic?
It's like watching two sides of the same coin, isn't it? Spider, with his effortless charm and manipulative tendencies, represents that seductive allure of power. He embodies that trickster archetype, always seeking to outsmart and exploit others for his own gain.
Whereas Fat Charlie at least initially represents the more grounded, hesitant side of that heritage. He wants connection and belonging, but he's also afraid of the responsibility that comes with power.
Exactly. And their interactions create this fascinating tension throughout the story. Spider constantly tempts Fat Charlie to embrace his darker impulses, to take shortcuts, and use his powers for personal gain.
But ultimately, it's through resisting those temptations and finding his own moral compass that Fat Charlie achieves true growth. He learns that true power comes not from manipulation or trickery, but from authenticity and compassion.
And that's a powerful message, isn't it? In a world that often rewards those who are willing to bend the rules and exploit others, Anansi Boys reminds us that true strength lies in integrity and kindness.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have the potential for both good and evil within us, but it's our choices that ultimately define who we become.
And sometimes those choices are difficult, but it's in those moments of struggle that that we discover our true selves.
So, Anansi Boys is not just a fun, fantastical adventure. It's also a story about personal growth, about finding your voice, and about choosing the path of integrity even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's a story that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to embrace the wonder of the unknown, and to strive for authenticity in a world that often rewards deception.
It sounds like Anansi Boys offers a lot to chew on, even for those who have already read it. What are some of the things you think readers should pay attention to on a second read through?
Oh, there are so many layers to this story. On a first read, you might be caught up in the plot and the fantastical elements. But on a second read, I encourage you to pay attention to the subtle nuances, the way Gaiman uses language to create atmosphere and foreshadow events.
I'm always amazed by how much foreshadowing he manages to weave into his stories without it feeling heavy-handed.
Exactly. It's like he's planting seeds that only fully blossom on subsequent readings.
Hmm.
Also pay attention to the recurring themes and symbols. Notice how they evolve and take on new meaning as the story progresses.
Like the spider motif, for example. It's not just a symbol of Anansi's trickster nature. It also represents the interconnectedness of all things, the webs of fate that bind us together.
Precisely. And those connections, those webs of fate, are what ultimately lead Fat Charlie to his destiny, even if it's a destiny he never could have imagined.
It seems like there's always something new to discover in Gaiman's work, even after multiple readings.
Absolutely. His stories have a way of staying with you, of revealing new layers of meaning over time. And that's what makes them so rewarding to revisit.
Okay, before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the importance of finding our own voices and telling our own stories. How do you think Anansi Boys encourages readers to do that?
Throughout the story, we see Fat Charlie struggling to find his voice, to assert himself in a world dominated by larger-than-life figures like his father and brother. But ultimately, it's through embracing his own unique perspective and experiences that he finds his strength.
So it's not about imitating others or trying to fit into a mold. It's about embracing our individuality and sharing our own unique stories with the world.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful message for anyone who's ever felt like their voice doesn't matter. Gaiman reminds us that every story is worth telling, and that even the quietest voices can have a profound impact.
It's a message of empowerment, isn't it? A reminder that we all have stories to tell, and that those stories have the power to connect us, inspire us, and even change the world.
Absolutely. And the Anansi Boys, with its celebration of storytelling and its emphasis on individual expression, is a perfect example of that.
It sounds like we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've talked about family, the power of storytelling, personal growth, and the importance of finding our own voices.
We've explored how Anansi Boys challenges us to look beyond the surface, to embrace the wonder of the unknown, and to strive for authenticity in a world that often rewards deception.
But there's still one more layer we need to unravel, the cultural and mythological influences woven into the story.
That's right. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into those rich traditions that inform the narrative and leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Stay tuned for part 3. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Anansi Boys. We've talked about Fat Charlie's journey, the power of stories, those complex family dynamics, and how Gaiman blends the ordinary with the extraordinary. But there's one more fascinating layer to unravel those cultural and mythological influences woven throughout the story.
Yeah, it's more than just a backdrop, isn't it? Gaiman doesn't just sprinkle in bits of folklore, he seamlessly integrates them into the very core of the narrative.
Exactly. It feels like a genuine homage to those traditions, especially the tales of Anansi the Spider God, primarily from African and Caribbean folklore. But for those who might not be familiar with those stories, how would you explain Anansi's significance?
Well, Anansi is this incredibly compelling figure, often seen as a trickster, a cunning manipulator who uses his wits to outsmart more powerful beings. But he's also a mediator between the human and divine, a storyteller who shapes reality with his tales. And, his stories often carry these profound moral lessons.
And those themes definitely echo in Anansi Boys itself. Fat Charlie has to outsmart dangerous figures, navigate moral dilemmas, and deal with the consequences of his family's actions, much like those characters in traditional Anansi stories.
Right. It's brilliant how Gaiman grounds the narrative in these rich traditions. It adds a layer of depth and meaning that resonates on multiple levels. It's not just a fun fantasy adventure. It's a story that speaks to the human condition through this culturally specific yet universally relatable lens.
The review highlighted how Gaiman's use of folklore actually emphasizes the universality of stories. How does he manage to pull that off?
Think about it. Anansi tales have been passed down for generations across continents and cultures. They tap into something fundamental about the human experience,
Mm.
that need to make sense of the world, to grapple with good and evil, to find meaning amidst chaos. Those themes are woven into the fabric of our collective consciousness, regardless of where we come from.
So even though the stories might originate in specific cultures, the themes they explore resonate across cultural boundaries.
Precisely. Gaiman recognizes that power of storytelling to transcend borders and connect us on a deeper level. He's using these culturally specific elements as a bridge to explore the universal truths about family identity and the power of stories themselves.
That's what makes it so captivating. It's not just a fun fantasy romp. It makes you think, makes you feel, and it invites you to connect with those deeper layers of meaning embedded in those ancient tales.
And it challenges us to examine our own relationship with storytelling. Are we just passive consumers of narratives, or can we, like Anansi, shape reality with the stories we choose to tell and embrace?
That's a powerful question to consider. It reminds us that we all have the potential to be storytellers, to shape our own realities and influence the world around us with the narratives we weave.
And Anansi Boys provides a blueprint in a way. It shows us how to find magic in the ordinary, how to embrace our heritage, and how to use our voices to create something meaningful and impactful.
So as we reach the end of our deep dive into Anansi Boys, what would you say is the most valuable takeaway for our listener? What should they carry with them from this exploration?
I think approach the world with a sense of wonder, an openness to the unexpected. Remember that magic in Gaiman's world isn't confined to fantastical realms. It exists in the everyday waiting to be discovered.
And those ancient myths, those folk tales passed down through generations, they aren't just relics of the past. They hold profound truths about the human experience waiting to be unearthed and woven into our own personal narratives.
Exactly. Embrace those stories, those echoes of ancient wisdom, and find ways to weave them into your own life. Who knows, you might just discover your own bit of magic along the way.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we leave you with one final thought to ponder. If you could inherit one magical ability from a god, what would it be, and how would it change your life?
Let that question simmer. Explore the possibilities, because in the world of Anansi Boys, and perhaps in our own, anything is possible if you dare to believe.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Anansi Boys. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the magic in everyday life.